upon a time in Massachusetts, Mitt Romney actually supported a health care mandate over Democratic objections. And we know this because Mark Merrimont, one of the Wall Street Journal's best journalists, my favorite, has uncovered new emails. Mark, tell us about, well, first I got to know, how did you get these emails, and weren't they supposed to be deleted?
Yes, right at the end of the Romney administration, at the end of 2006, Governor Romney's aides actually bought 17 hard drives from their PCs and took them away. They paid $65 a piece for the hard drives, said that they were personal property essentially, and took them away. They also, somebody deleted all the emails off the server in the governor's office so that there was almost basically nothing left of an electronic record from Governor Romney's time, 4 years in office here. But it turned out that one cabinet secretary's emails, for a variety of reasons, were accidentally retained on another server. So we filed a Public Records Act request to get these emails and look through them. And there are a number of interesting things, but the thing that I found most interesting was to focus on that period in 2006 when Massachusetts was passing what some people now call Romneycare, which was a healthcare overhaul that has become a bit controversial in the current election.
We've also, by the way, one interesting bit from your piece is we actually had Mitt Romney trying to shame companies that didn't want to provide insurance. We have the quote, government's original notion of having some sort of public disclosure of employers who promote a culture of uninsurance. He wanted to kind of let people know who are the bad companies that aren't providing insurance, which sounds a very Democratic idea.
Yes, it does, and it's you know, one of these private emails going back and forth between Mitt Romney and one of his top aides, and he wasn't actually involved in this particular exchange, but she says the governor's, let's bring back in the governor's original idea of naming these companies that didn't provide enough insurance, and she went actually a step further in this email and said, why don't we just get a whole list together every quarter and publish it as an ad in the Boston Globe, which is a somewhat liberal newspaper known to be. And it just seems very unusual for a Republican governor.
Yeah, what's interesting, you mentioned in your story, of course, Mark, that the emails show he didn't originally support a mandate, but his staff, it sounds like his staff really convinced him to support it, and that was over Democratic objections. The Democrats, you mentioned, actually had an alternative plan that focused on, wait for it, individual responsibility, quote unquote.
Yes, well, that's, actually, there's a whole very interesting series of emails back and forth where the then Senate President had a lengthy presentation that talked about, you know, their approach. This is in February, the whole thing was signed in April, so it's coming down to the end of the process. And they talked about individual responsibility, and Tim Murphy, who was Romney's health secretary, says, now wait a minute, in the email, we can't make this work without an individual mandate, and he copied Mitt Romney on the email, and of course the individual mandate eventually was passed. There's also a series of emails in which Governor Romney is actually authoring a op-ed piece that appeared in the Wall Street Journal the day before he signed the legislation, in which he talked about how proud he was of it and how great it was. And in there, he discusses the individual mandate and why it was necessary in terms that I think are something in a way that the Obama administration would use, which is that if you don't have health insurance, you go to the hospital, the taxpayers have to foot the bill.
Great.
And so there's, you know, it's actually worth, we posted all the emails online.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And it's worth looking at his draft. For one thing, he's a pretty good writer. But also just to see what his sort of unvarnished, unedited words have to say.
Yeah, Mark, you mentioned a good thing. So if you go to the article on WSJ.com, you click over the interactive graphics page, you can actually see this whole big cache of emails. I think we got 73 pages of them for all of you who want to see the primary documents. It's very fascinating. And Mark, tell me, so now that we've actually gotten through the Republican primary, of course, Mitt Romney's Republican rivals love to hit him for supporting a mandate in Massachusetts, but he's gotten through that gauntlet, right? Is this issue going to have as much resonance in a general election?
I'm not sure it'll have as much resonance. I mean, I think that it's probably going to come up if the Supreme Court, for example, later this month strikes down the federal plan, the so-called Obamacare plan for the individual mandate issue. that could be somewhat embarrassing to Governor Romney, because he also supported something similar in Massachusetts. Of course, he says it's okay for Massachusetts, but it's really it's a states' rights issue, and the federal government should not be requiring this around the country. But I think that the issue for Governor Romney is more the sort of flip-flopping question of first he was for it, now he's against it sort of thing. That's probably going to have a little less resonance in the general election than it did in the primary.